So this is a first for me. I'm actually going to take you to a little visit to one of my watercolour art classes, and I am going to paint a sort of a scene in the Cotswolds where I visited recently, and I took some great photographs and I absolutely loved the stone walls. So here is the photograph, and I just love the distance here as well, the beautiful sky and all those textures on that stone wall. And I was getting really excited about all the different techniques I could use, and I thought it'd be a great demonstration as well for my watercolour art students. And just to say a big thank you to all of my students for all your wonderful questions and for partaking in this video. Let's get started. And I am using cold press paper, and I'm using masking fluid. I'm going to use a bit of Brusho, some salt, cling film, you name it. It's mainly for the walls, really, to create that lovely texture.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
What's the tape called, and why is it special?
Do you know? It's special for two reasons. One is it's pretty to look at, and two, it doesn't tear your paper, and it does the job of masking tape. And I just think it's a bit kinder than masking tape. But you can get it on Amazon.
It's thinner than the...
You can get it sort of different widths. I just got it this width because they do loads of pretty designs. Okay, composition. The wall is almost the star of the show, but what we're going to do is I'm going to sort of divide it into thirds, but the sky going down to the horizon line is going to be quite sort of thin, and then we'll just put a few little trees here and here, a little bit over here, like that, and then you've got another sort of field in front of that. And I love these sort of diagonal lines here, a little bit of perspective there, leading your eye, the tractor marks I expect they are, leading your eye to this sort of other sort of hedgerow here. We're getting down to the wall, which is lovely, which is here. Now don't worry about all the detail of this. This is where I'm going to use the cling film. Actually, I'm not even going to draw it because I can just do that with the cling film later. But what I am going to do is I'm going to mask out these lovely little white flowers there. I've got some liquid soap here, so you can help yourself to that, and also help yourself to the masking fluid as well. So dip your brush in there so it just protects the brush while you're using the masking fluid. And I'm just going to use that just for those white flowers. Just little dots like that. You don't even have to try to do it exactly like it is in the photograph. Just keep it really loose so it looks all kind of like wild flowers there. Is that Queen Anne's lace, do you think? Cowslip. Cow parsley. I'm just doing a few more. So what I'm going to do as well is I'm just going to give a little spatter here and there as well, so it looks a little bit more loose. There we are. And that'll take a little bit of time to dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to paint the sky. But I think I'll get you to prepare that first. Yeah. Has anyone got any questions?
Is the wall halfway down?
I would say it's just below halfway line. You don't want even if the wall in the photograph is halfway down.
Yes.
I would like you in the painting to shift it down below that. And then you can put the flowers sort of going over the halfway line, and it's just a nice way of composing the picture, because otherwise it can actually look quite flat. That was a good question. Anyone else? Any other questions? Right, off you go. We're going to use Cobalt blue or Ultramarine, burnt Sienna or burnt umber, and some yellow. You could use a bit of quinacridone gold as well, just to liven up some of those greens there.
There's a bit limey here, isn't it?
Yes.
Front,
so that, if you wanted that limey green, you could use a little bit of phthalo blue or Prussian blue. It's the blue that'll make that green limey.
Okay.
That makes sense. So I'm going to paint back to front. Basically, I'm going to paint the distance first, or the sky, distant fields, work my way to the foreground. It's exciting.
cerulean in the sky.
You could do, yeah. And especially if you want that limey green, you could go with some cerulean. Let's put some cerulean into the mix. I haven't got ultramarine in here. I know it's a shock. It's cobalt blue. And a little bit of quinacridone gold, just because it makes your greens a little bit more exciting. A bit of burnt sienna. And it's really just to make some greys and darks. And some yellow, cadmium yellow that is. We could use lemon yellow. Right, okay, so let's mix up some colours for the sky. So I'm going to use some cerulean, and I'm also going to use a little bit of cobalt blue. Okay, and I'm going to wet the sky, and you can put your painting on a little tilt as well, and that sort of lets the paint flow down nicely. Also, it shows you if you've got enough paint on your brush. So I've got my colours mixed. Obviously there's some cloud shadows there, so I'll mix those up as well. But I'm just going to paint this down to the horizon. There we are. Spend a bit of time doing that because it'll give you more time. But remember to mix up your colours before. Okay. So I'm just going to make that creamier. Just take that off there. Let's put that cerulean into the sky, just tickle it in there like that, and I might add cobalt blue to the cerulean and not use it on its own, just to make it a bit brighter, just here and there. And as it goes towards the horizon, just have the colours paler and smaller, that sky colour. So there's a bit of a puddle there. And it just creates depth. Right, so what we do now is, you might want to do this actually before, mix up these colours beforehand. But I'm mixing up a bit of burnt sienna with that cobalt blue, about 50-50. And I'm just going to put some shadows underneath. It needs a bit more brown in there. A little bit of shadow underneath those clouds there. So the top of the clouds remain light, and put some cloud shadow underneath like that. It's quite nice. And again, as you get towards the horizon, it gets paler. So you just sort of have paler sort of shadow colours like that, just literally a line. I might just soften that there, because it dried so quickly. Just soften that there. And just soften that there as well. And you can use some paper towel if you want to as well, just to lift off, which is quite nice to do. Some of the light on top of the clouds there. Just a bit more, just on that right hand side there. And there. It's quite a busy sky. I always say busy sky, sort of simple landscape, and vice versa. If it's a very busy landscape, you want a simple sky. Otherwise it's all too busy. What I'm going to do now is, obviously you can see those distant trees and they look dark. What you don't want to do is paint dark trees because they'll come forward. So I'm going to use artistic license and just mainly sort of use a bit of that cobalt blue. I think it's got a touch of that burnt sienna in there because it's a bit more greyed. So just, I'll mix it up from fresh actually. So cobalt blue with a touch of yellow. I'm going to use the side of my brush. I might just put a touch more yellow in there actually. So it's kind of like a blue-green. Now the sky is still damp and that's okay, but just make sure your brush isn't too wet, that it doesn't run too much into the sky. So you'll get a soft edge, which is quite nice. So I'm just sort of, you can see I'm using the side of the brush, and you might want to just vary those greens so they're not all the same sort of colour. I'm so tempted to use a bit of pink to make a violet sort of colour, but I'm going to resist. So just sort of, that's more of a blue-green. Ooh. And just make more of the cobalt blue. Add a touch, actually I'm going to use a touch of the quinacridone gold and that cobalt blue. take the excess off, and you might want to just sort of paint that sort of dark just at the bottom, not of every tree, just sort of pick a bit of hit and miss just along that horizon line there. So I've really simplified those trees. Less is more, less is more. I feel like I could carry on, but I feel that's enough information, isn't it? So you've got sky with the cerulean, or you can use cerulean and cobalt blue, and then for the cloud shadows, that was the cobalt or ultramarine with some burnt sienna, and that was sort of damp into damp that. And then that was the blue with a touch of yellow, and you can just vary that and make them small and use the side of your brush as well. Okay? Any questions?
Yes. If you haven't got cobalt.
You can use ultramarine.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm just going to paint this sort of area here, and I'm going to use a sort of a light to mid green. So I don't want it too bright. So I'm using ultramarine and a bit of the yellow. So get a great big puddle there of this mid green. You can paint that wet into wet or wet on dry. If you're going to paint it wet on dry, use a big brush. Don't use a little brush. And just really, look at that. Load that brush. Okay. Now I'm looking at that, and that's actually too watery. So I'm just going to quickly mix up some thicker paint. So that, see how that's a bit better?
I already said that was too dark.
But remember, watercolour dries lighter. So that's probably in my mind why I did that, because I know that's going to happen. If you notice, I'm just doing one stroke. When you get those little hard, little sparkly bits, don't try to fill them in because it looks nicer. This is just yellow with a touch of the blue there, because I just want to add a sort of separate sort of colour in there, and just paint those one strokes coming down to the wall there. So just using a bit of a dry brush effect there. So leaving that now, I'm going to mix up quite a creamy, hardly any water, more paint on the brush, and take the excess off here and just paint damp into damp. And if it runs too much, I think it's running a little bit too much there. You could do this wet on dry as well later.
Was that burnt sienna?
No, it's quinacridone gold with the ultramarine. I'm actually going to make that even darker. Take the excess off there. And I'm just sort of, because the paper is damp, it's quite nice because it's running a little bit, so it looks like sort of foliage. It's quite nice and soft. Just have a really dark colour. And I'm just going to drop that here and there, going back into the dark green. Just sort of trying to keep it as simple as possible, leaving those gaps. And I'm going to I feel like that's almost too dark, so I just added a bit more yellow to that. So just painting these sort of tractor lines here as it comes through to the foreground there, just create more grass sort of effect there as it comes through, keeping it simple, and then using that dark. I feel like I need to go to a bigger brush. There seems to be a lot of fluid there. Just take that excess off and just sort of paint some of those dark grasses like that, just going through. Actually, especially where the white flowers are. So it really brings that out. It's kind of a bit of artistic license there. So I'm just going to repeat that, going along. Okay, and
It's already pushed it back.
it really has, hasn't it? And then just, again, there's hardly any water in that paint, and just put a few sort of thinner grasses and stems just along that line there. I just made it slightly darker here, and even sort of put just a few more little darks here and there as well as it comes around. I feel that's very dark there, and this is a lot lighter, so I'm just going to add a touch more of that dark just along there, just to balance it out. makes all the difference. And you can use your plastic card as well. Don't use it straight away because otherwise if it all runs back in on itself, it's too wet. So I'm just using that now just to lift off, even over here, just a little bit of lifting off. Like that. And it's just knowing when to stop. I'm just going to wet this, soften that area there. Just to be prepared for the rocks later. And guys, actually I'm going to chuck a little bit of salt on that as well. Just on that foreground area, not in the middle distance, just on those dark grasses. It may not work because it's dried off a little bit, but it may work. Do you know what would work really well here, but I forgot to bring some, is wax resist, because there's quite nice sort of textures there. So, hey, never mind. So I'm just going to keep this really simple, mixing up some cobalt blue with burnt sienna, or you could use burnt umber. I want to do a couple of puddles, one more sort of bluey grey and the other one more of a sort of browny sort of grey. So I'm just going to wet some areas. It just helps. So I'm sort of just painting that in the sort of shapes of those rocks there, just adding a bit of the warm grey as well. And then these ones more this way, aren't they? That's dried a bit, so I'm just going to wet that really in the foreground there. A little bit more of that sort of brown colour there as well. I think divide the cling film up into two, because one rocks are going one way and the other's going, it might make it easier. So we'll just do the bottom ones first and just, oh, that looks good. I don't know if it'll look good the other way though, so we'll see. But just sort of manipulating it. So there's a little bit of a light patch there. And what I would suggest is just mixing up some more paint here, adding a little bit of paint there, like that. Oh, I tell you something, cling film is meant for these walls. It's brilliant. You're going to love it. I might just add a bit more dark here. So there we are. This is drying so quickly. I would suggest is paint the bottom bit first, because that's dried, literally. It's drying so quickly. I can see it, the shine's gone. So do your bottom bit first, spend time, manipulate that, and then do the same thing at the top. One bluey brown. I'm just going to put that in. Hopefully the backgrounds that I'm going to be creating here by accident will help. So it may not work as well because it dried, but yeah, let's just see. So placing this on like that, pull up that way. It's not as easy. So this has not worked as well. Shame, but anyway. I'm actually going to leave because I think it'll be all right, but I'm just going to manipulate it because it's good for you to see me struggle. There we are. This ultramarine and burnt sienna. I've kept it really nice and simple. And you can just sort of use some bit more bluey brown, others, and keep that on until it's set. So it doesn't have to be dried. And whatever you do, don't try and blow dry it. If you do give me a shout. I'd like to watch. Look at that. Ooh. It's set already. So, right, off you go. I don't know how we're going to finish this.
How do you know when it's set?
You can normally, if you do that and it all runs back, wait a bit longer.
Right.
And just at the top of the dry stone wall, what I'm doing is I'm just wetting it so you don't get hard edges going up into the foliage. So just sort of soften it a bit. That's what I've done.
Don't you want hard edges? Because it's rocks sticking up.
It's got a lot of light on those. See that?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so I've just wanted to add a bit of light. And that's where the wax would have been good. So a bit of wax resist would have been very nice. But what I'm going to do is just take off the little flowers. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to paint the whole thing, but I'm going to give you an idea. So when you've got the rocks here, you can mix up, I mean, even for quickness, you could mix up a bit of Paynes grey just to paint the darks. Or you can mix up your blue and your brown. But what I'm doing here is I'm just painting some of the darks here along that wall. So when I've got that, and I'll just sort of paint some of the darks up. And this is what will take a little bit of time, and we won't have enough time here, but at least you've got the idea of it. And I'm just going to paint a few. So I'm just going to soften those darks there like that as well, coming up. And the same at the bottom there, just softening those. And because of the detail, you can just spend a little bit of time finessing those, bringing those up around the top part there. You can see it sort of brings it to life. I love it though, because it's sort of, there's lots of smaller stones there as well, so you can sort of pick out them. Everything is dry. This is, look at this, it's drying in my palette.
Yes.
Add a few more darts going back in. And you can do the same with these smaller ones as well. Just sort of painting some of the dark marks. Needs a little bit more burnt sienna on that one there, but and then again sort of rinse your brush and then just soften that there, so there's shadow sort of colours. But the cling film creates that sort of lovely texture there as well. White gouache, and you can use a paper towel, a sponge or something like that. Create some of the texture on the rocks, which is quite nice. A bit of that, and that's quite effective. And it just creates that texture there. And I'll do that same down here as well. And that's straight from the tube. And you can paint a few grasses. And there's some lovely yellowy, really bright sort of yellowy sort of grasses there. And sometimes I find you can just use a little bit of the white with that as well. Add a bit of yellow. It's got loads, isn't it? Sort of lots of marks and things like that. Add a little bit of darks sort of to create your grasses there, and just enjoy it, you know. So let's get some of that Brusho on. So I'm just tapping that here and there. Put it on dry and then spritz it, and it kind of, it's quite nice. Or you can wet your painting like that, and this is moss green, not black, and you can actually put that on the wet surface. So you can either put it on dry, then spritz it, or the other way around. So there we are. Yes, you can. Yeah. With some sandpaper. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I love doing that actually. So the students went off to finish off their paintings as best they could. It's just a 2-hour class, so it was quite ambitious to do all of this work. But it's quite nice just to go home and start to build up on the detail. And I'm just showing you a little bit more here of that building up that darks there. You can use the Paynes grey or the burnt sienna or burnt umber with either ultramarine or cobalt blue or another dark that you fancy. But as you can see there, I'm using my size 4 brush and just painting some darks in the foreground. Just trying to paint less is more though. You don't want to paint every single little bit of detail. You just want to give an impression of this scene here. I also thought it'd be quite nice to mix up some dark greens. I've actually cheated and used a little bit of Viridian with some Paynes grey and some burnt sienna, but I'm just painting some darker green grasses at the top of the rocks where the rocks would be lighter at the top there, just to bring them out a little bit more and just to kind of really create that 3D look and create depth in my painting as well. I'm using my size 8 brush and just sort of going up and down with the brush, painting in this dark, really shaping the top of the rocks there.
Doing the sponging on the white is good, isn't it?
It's really effective, isn't it? And I'm just softening some of these darks here with my size 8 brush at the bottom of the rocks here. It's almost like an abstract area here, and it's a really nice way of finishing off some very busy rocks.
Some nice rock shapes down here.
Oh yes, so you could actually really sort of
Outline those.
that's what I find when you go back into it, you can stop having a little play with it as well. So guys, thank you so much. I'll be in touch with some new dates, so it probably will be September. So I really hope you enjoyed that visit to my art class and found it helpful watching the tutorial in real time and also listening to the questions and hopefully finding the answers to those questions helpful. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And don't forget, if you like this content and you'd like to see more like it, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel where you will get updates of my latest videos. And if you want to learn more about watercolour, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about that can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching and visiting. Happy painting. Bye for now.